Greetings, yet another episode of Nota bene. The topic we'll be discussing today is of utmost importance and holds great interest. We will discuss Russia's hybrid attacks on Moldova. I titled the topic as Putin's Matryoshka. Our conversation will focus on the situation in Moldova, testing ground for the Kremlin's secret weapons. And we will address the following questions in this topic. The Kremlin initiates a casus belli, Putin's Doctrine, Matryoshka, a collection of tools utilized for hybrid warfare, a total of 12 strikes conducted by Putin on Moldova, AVA TV and AVA's plans to counter hybrid attacks. Okay, let's begin with the initial topic. The Kremlin is establishing a casus belli. Moscow has made the decision that there exist countries which are included in the sphere of Russia's privileged interests. And only Russia has the right to determine what to do with these countries, whom to establish alliances with, and whom to disregard. All post-Soviet republics, countries of former socialist bloc, as well as some countries in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where Russia has its interests, are included among these countries. Moldova is one of the top countries on this list. Russia is of the belief that it can take action in Moldova without being influenced by the will of its people, the positions held by its authorities, or the international community. Russia controls part of Moldova's territory, the Transnistrian region, and maintains its military presence in that area. And despite the commitments made at the Istanbul summit in 1999, it refuses to withdraw it. At the same time, Russia has unleashed a hybrid war against Moldova. The goals of hybrid attacks are numerous, and I will talk more about this in this broadcast. But I will mention one of the goals now. It is to create a pretext for military action against Moldova. What pretext is the Kremlin looking for? Russian authorities baselessly accuse Moldova of conducting a Russophobic policy and discriminating against Russians and Russian speakers. Russian officials and Kremlin propagandists spread false information about Russophobia and the persecution of Russians and Russian speakers. Politicians and propagandists in Moldova are connected to this, serving the interests of the Kremlin. The Russian embassy in Moldova is also involved in this. Let's remember the first days of Russia's war with Ukraine. What is the Russian embassy in Moldova doing at this time? The embassy publicly appeals to Moldovan citizens to report incidents of harassment against Russian-speaking citizens, as well as Russian citizens in Moldova, and instances of Russophobia. What is the reason behind this call? Clearly, in order to provide a pretext for Russia to introduce its army into Moldova. In late February to early March 2022, the Russian army approached Kyiv and advanced in the south of Ukraine. The plan was to capture Odessa and reach the borders with Moldova. And there needed to be a pretext for the Russian army's invasion of Moldova following the expected Russian victory in Ukraine. These plans were not hidden. Russian politicians, propagandists, deputies, and even military personnel talked about them. The plan was to finally take control of Transnistria by declaring this region as Russian territory. At the same time, Russia actively engaged with the population and elite of Gagauzia, persuading them to convene a congress of deputies and mayors at all levels and to ask Russia either to recognize Gagauzia's independence or to accept Gagauzia into Russia. It did not work out then. Ukraine halted the offensive. The Russian army failed to reach the borders of Moldova. They are now working on another reason to increase pressure on Moldova. It was invented and actively spread by the Kremlin and its agents of influence in Moldova. The essence of it lies in accusing Moldova of militarization. Moldova recently bought a radar. This is clearly considered militarization, a radar that watches the sky. And here they are saying they bought a radar, so they must be preparing for war. Every day we hear that the Moldovan government is getting ready for war, Sandu. This is war. The European Union, this is war. Nonsense and stupidity. But all of this is promoted and circulated by everyone who works for the Kremlin in Moldova. And this is a large army of politicians, propagandists, influencers, and useful idiots. And numerous information resources circulate all of this. How does the Moldovan government react to this? The authorities are reacting sluggishly, thinking that all this is nonsense and lies, and no one in Moldova will believe it. Yes, this is stupidity and lies. But when this stupidity and lies, these deceitful narratives, are constantly thrown into the information space and circulated, and the authorities remain silent, then citizens get the impression that it is true, and the authorities have no arguments to refute it. We, the internet channel AVA TV and the AVMD website, constantly address this issue and believe that such informational attacks should be responded to. Yes, we have over 3 million views per month, but to counter such attacks, we need an audience that is 10 or maybe even 15 times larger, and to deliver information not only in Russian but also in Romanian. And for this, we need resources that we don't have. Why do we believe all this is very important? Well, first of all, the Kremlin and its propagandists are brainwashing the citizens of Moldova. Zombies can be employed for a multitude of purposes, such as power grabs and forcible actions. Secondly, they have the potential to create divisions within society. Thirdly, they create a pretext for direct military actions by Russia against Moldova. Just a reminder, President Putin possesses extensive powers to invade all of the former Soviet republics. What is the pretext for such actions? In order to safeguard Russian compatriots residing overseas who are purportedly facing oppression, and this unfounded justification provides them with a pretext for invading Moldova. The aggressor in the form of Putin organizes the necessary casus belli for this purpose. And this needs to be constantly talked about, delivering the information to both the Moldovan people and the global community. The world must know about the danger that threatens Moldova. It is necessary for the world to know that what the Kremlin calls the protection of Russian citizens and the gathering of Russian lands is actually aggression and the occupation of independent states. And what transpired with Ukraine confirms this. Now, let's delve into Putin's doctrine, which has been widely discussed and analyzed in recent times. Let's have a conversation about the genuine, not imaginary restraints on which the regime of Putin relies for its power. I will enumerate the primary, in my view, limitations of Putin in quotation marks. The reinforcement of the autocratic regime in Russia, which has essentially already transformed into a dictatorial one. A regime that depends on the bayonets of the security forces, mainly the Federal Security Service, FSB. Support for such regimes in other nations such as Syria, Venezuela, North Korea, Belarus, and other countries with similar political systems. Suppression of dissent and curtailment of freedoms in Russia, suppression of political competition in Russia, increasing militarization, and preparation for major wars. Engaging in hybrid attacks on other nations, corrupting politicians and propagandists from foreign countries, employing energy and other natural resources as means of international influence, exerting pressure through various tactics and strategies. Powerful, all-encompassing propaganda. It is worth noting that it is quite professional and effective. The utilization of Russian military force overseas in order to safeguard Russian speakers, enclosed in quotation marks. Let's take Ukraine as an example once again. Now let's discuss the tools of hybrid attacks on Moldova, which has become a testing ground for evaluating the effectiveness of different weapons utilized in such conflicts. Let's refer to this set as a Matryoshka. Matryoshka is a collection of tools for conducting hybrid warfare against Moldova. Well, Let's begin with, what is the objective of this war? The objective is to generate chaos, destabilization, and consequently to displace the undesirable Russian authorities and take control with Kremlin's puppets. Some of these tactics were employed in Ukraine. Those in the Kremlin responsible for this operation, as well as Kremlin's agents of influence in Ukraine, spent over $5 billion on it. Putin believed operation successful, troops could be deployed, population welcoming them warmly with flowers and applause. They made a miscalculation. However, the Kremlin is acquiring knowledge, including from its own errors. And the hybrid attack on Moldova has become a testing ground where both old tools of hybrid warfare and some innovations are being tested. And if successful in Moldova, this strategy will be actively applied in other countries. Yes, hybrid wars come at a high cost, both in terms of resources and human lives. Even a small country like Moldova can witness hundreds of millions of dollars being expended. However, this is still much less costly compared to an actual war. Let us consider together the 12 strikes by Putin on Moldova. We'll start with the first one, which involves buying politicians and parties. In Moldova, there are politicians with whom the Kremlin actively collaborates and finances. There are parties that represent interests for the Kremlin and are additionally financially supported by it. Among them are parties and politicians openly supportive of Russia, but there are also some politicians and parties that may not openly express a pro-Russian stance. Furthermore, they portray themselves as pro-European or even pro-Romanian in order to establish their alleged stance. However, they are funded by the Kremlin and utilized by it for various purposes, ultimately working in the interests of Moscow and serving as a means of advancing its agenda. The Kremlin's goal is to use them to undermine the situation in Moldova, destabilize it, and then bring to power those who will work for the interests of the Kremlin. Influencing the intellectual and business elite is already the second point. In these conditions, the Kremlin has not achieved such significant success as it has with politicians, as it has with parties. There are certain problems here, but the Kremlin is persistently working in this direction. It is especially active with those who studied in Russia and have business ties with this country. It is also used by those who are dissatisfied with the current authorities for various reasons. Another intriguing aspect to consider is the third point, the corruption of officials and law enforcement officers. This is a special focus area for the Kremlin's work. Here, there is an interest from various power structures of the Kremlin, the FSB, GRU, and foreign intelligence. And there are specific tasks they need to solve in Moldova. They may also be involved separately in solving political tasks, for example, with the aim of obstructing particular actions, particularly those concerning Ukraine and Transnistria especially, to weaken criminal cases against opposition politicians implicated in corruption and various fraudulent schemes for personal gain, putting sticks in the wheels of those who oppose Russian hybrid attacks, and there are such in Moldova, unfortunately. This is a very dangerous direction of the Kremlin's actions, as it is difficult to predict where and from where strikes may be delivered inside Moldova. The fourth point, participation in hybrid warfare involving influence agents and individuals who are used as pawns. Influence agents, or simply agents, are individuals who do not publicly disclose their connection to Russia, but, owing to their fame and certain influence, covertly work behind the scenes for the interests of the Kremlin. They might not commend the Kremlin or any pro-Russian politicians or parties in that location, but instead concentrate on criticizing the government or European integration or the European Union or the United States of America in a broad sense. And all this while hiding behind independence and being above the fray. To achieve this goal, they also use some useful idiots, of which, unfortunately, there are many in our country. Fifth column, an army of propagandists. It should be noted that by collaborating with politicians and parties, as well as public associations, the Kremlin has formed a significant group of propagandists in Moldova working in the interests of Russia. It is crucial to note that the Kremlin does not require all propagandists to offer praise to Russia or Putin. The majority specializes in criticizing the United States of America, the European Union, European integration of Moldova, individual politicians from Europe and the United States of America, as well as some countries like France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, Romania, Ukraine, and so on. And naturally, regarding the criticism of the government of Moldova and specifically President Maia Sandu. Point number 6, information resources. In Moldova, some pro-Russian TV channels have been banned from broadcasting. But they were not shut down. They moved to the internet, and some managed to place their shows on the remaining TV channels. It should be noted that recently the Kremlin has been making a lot of effort to saturate the internet in Moldova with pro-Russian video content and has already achieved certain successes. Additionally, there has been an expansion into social networks, primarily in the messaging app Telegram. Roughly 80 to 85% of the political content in the Russian language in Moldova comprises the content that is effective for the Kremlin's agenda and aligns with their interests. Let's list the social networks where they are actively working. These include Telegram, VKontakte, YouTube, Odnoklasniki, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Furthermore, in addition to this, there is an enormous army of trolls that are spreading sponsored content all over the internet. Subsequently, we face economic pressure. It is widely known that Moldova has been tightly held by the gas noose, a situation that has had a prolonged and severe impact on our economy, as it has kept us in its grip for an extensive period of time. And just in the last few years, we have finally begun to free ourselves from this suffocating dependence on Russian gas by procuring gas from external sources. In addition, periodic embargoes are imposed on the supply of agricultural products and wine to the Russian market, and only permitted for individuals who are being influenced by politicians with pro-Russian views. For certain politicians in Moldova, this has even transformed into a business endeavor. Following point: separatism. The Kremlin is currently engaged in active efforts in Transnistria and assumes complete control of this area, particularly in recent times when the FSB has increased its activity there. And an attempt to create a new hotspot of tension, Gagauzia, I will not delve into this in detail right now, as these are separate topics. A few words. Here is the 9th point regarding the narratives that the Kremlin disseminates in Moldova. I've already stated some. In some areas I'll repeat, in others I'll mention new ones. The theme of Russophobia and violations of the rights of Russians and Russian speakers in Moldova is still actively promoted, baseless yet persistently and systematically. Another problem is the violation of neutrality, but in reality only Russia violates it, as its army, contrary to the requirements of the Moldovan constitution, does not leave our country's territory. Lately, there have been informational attacks on the topic of the so-called militarization of Moldova. I've already mentioned they bought a radar, so militarization is underway, and about Moldova preparing for war. This topic has been constantly circulating for the last 2-3 months, practically on a daily basis. Also being discussed is the crisis in European Union countries and the lack of prospects for Moldova's European integration. There is a propaganda campaign suggesting that Moldova has only one perspective, which is to join the Eurasian Economic Union. This is far from being a comprehensive list of narratives initiated by the Kremlin and disseminated by its puppets in Moldova. We will frequently revisit these topics and reveal the falsehood of numerous narratives that are widely spread. Another subject, 10th, disinformation, manipulation, fakes, and deception in media. This is a separate big topic that requires, well, not just one, but maybe a dozen episodes because there is a lot to talk about. On this day, I will solely express a small number of words concerning the aims and objectives of all of this. The primary objective of disinformation and manipulation is to undermine the credibility of the leadership of Moldova, undermine trust in Western institutions, hinder Moldova's European choice, create an atmosphere of chaos and instability in Moldova. 11. Hacker attacks. State and private structures face a relentless barrage of attacks, posing a constant threat to their security and stability. We saw hacks of the President's website, government, parliament, and other official institutions. And the 12th point, electoral grid. It is also referred to as a network structure that is utilized for the purpose of conducting elections. This is a new direction in political technologies utilized by the Kremlin in order to increase their influence. It is about direct bribery of voters, a significant number of voters, by tens, if not already hundreds of thousands of voters. Using a selective grid, in Moldova, it was possible to appoint as the head of Gagauzia an unknown person without political and managerial experience. Their intention is to extensively utilize this network to disrupt the referendum on European integration and the presidential elections on October 20th, 2024, as well as undoubtedly in the parliamentary elections in 2025. Let's draw some conclusions. It is necessary to realize the real danger of Russia's hybrid attacks. Understanding that by unleashing a hybrid war against Moldova, the Kremlin aims to take full control of our country and suffocate its sovereignty. The intensification of the hybrid war against Moldova started after Russia's direct aggression against Ukraine. I repeat, it had been ongoing for a while, but intensified after February 2022. The reason for this is that Moldova shares a border with Ukraine, and the length of this border is over 1,000 kilometers. The transit of goods, which is important for Ukraine, is carried out through Moldova. The chaos in Moldova, provoked and directed by the Kremlin, as well as the change of power they are seeking, could potentially have a significant impact on Ukraine's ability to resist and disrupt this crucial logistical supply chain. The decision of the European Council on December 14, 2023, to grant Moldova candidate status and the imminent start of negotiations on Moldova's accession to the European Union defined the radicalization of the Kremlin regime's plans towards Moldova. The Kremlin understands that Moldova's European integration means Moldova's final departure from Kremlin's influence. The EU integration of Moldova signifies the irreversible transition of its citizens into the space of peace, freedom, and democracy. Russia is incapable of gaining control of Moldova through elections that are free and fair. Therefore, Russia's goal with hybrid attacks is to destabilize the situation in Moldova and carry out a state coup disguised as a popular uprising. Having achieved its goal in Moldova, Russia will turn its attention to other countries using the tested hybrid warfare technologies from Moldova. What should be done? We are of the opinion that it is imperative to establish a state system aimed at countering hybrid attacks. First and foremost, this involves the development and implementation of a national strategy to counter hybrid attacks. Strengthening cybersecurity, combating disinformation and propaganda, promoting media literacy and critical thinking in society, cooperating with Ukraine, the EU, NATO, and the USA to exchange best practices and resources, imposing sanctions and restrictions on individuals and organizations involved in hybrid attacks. And the final part of my presentation, the plans of AVA TV and AVA MD, are the resources on which we work to counter hybrid attacks. In Moldova, there is much talk about the need to combat Russia's hybrid attacks, but the authorities have not yet developed a system of measures to counteract them. While there is no state system in place, the AVTV Internet channel and the AVMD website have developed their own plan of action. We will focus on solving the following tasks: analyzing the actions of pro-Russian politicians, parties, propagandists, and exposing their destructive role; countering the Kremlin's efforts to create hotbeds of tension in the regions of Moldova, Transnistria, Gagauzia, Balti, and others; fighting disinformation, manipulation, and fake news; uncovering the false narratives of the Kremlin regarding the situation in Moldova; analysis of the network structure's activities for elections and proposals for comprehensive measures to prevent its influence on the electoral process and ensure the integrity of the electoral system; dissemination of information to the citizens of Moldova and other countries about Putin's totalitarian regime and the aggressive nature of the Kremlin's policies, which pose a danger to Moldova as well as other countries. This broadcast is my inaugural attempt to amalgamate my knowledge in this particular field with the capability of artificial intelligence and present them in the English language, utilizing the advanced technology of machine learning. The goal is to convey to a broad English-speaking audience the danger posed by Russian hybrid attacks today for Moldova and tomorrow for other countries. In the future, should we obtain financial backing, we will persist in making preparations for these types of broadcasts. Well, not only Nota Bene like today, but also our upcoming shows broadcasted on AVA TV, such as Geopolitics, Elections, Terrarium, Aspect. The interview needs to be conveyed to the public in both English and Romanian languages. We aim to communicate the information effectively by providing translations in these two languages. Let's see. Perhaps we'll achieve success with all of this. Wishing you the best. Until we meet again.